This is Discovering the Scriptures with Dr. Peter John Parisis. We are in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verse 7. Reading from the King James Bible, quote, "They answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it," unquote. Now, comparing this with the Young's Literal Translation, quote, "They have answered a second time, and are saying, Let the king tell the dream to his servants, and the interpretations we do show," unquote. Now let's compare this with the exact translation, not word with sentence structure, from the Interlinear Bible, quote, "And its interpretation, his servants, let tell, dream thee, king thee, and said, again, they answered, we will give." Now, when you look at this verse in context, we find out that it sits on its own as far as paragraphs go. So, again, the King James Bible, quote, "They answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it," unquote. Now, I stress all the time when people are talking to me about Bible study and in this program, Discovering Scriptures, that it's important to pray and ask God for insight, wisdom, and knowledge so that you will be able to receive from our teacher, the Holy Spirit, what God wants to give us for our walk. Now, one thing I've noticed in Daniel as he's writing this book, that he is going along and telling us things about himself for reasons, and I'm starting to see it and put it together. So during my devotional prayer time, the Lord showed me Daniel has related that he has decided to stand earlier in chapter 1 in his teachings about the Mosaic Law as far as eating and what to eat, what not to eat, and has, with God's favor, procured this through the Melzar on the food and drink that the king has provided, so they're able to do what God wants them to do and not what the Babylonian king has provided for them, and is able to eat and drink what they're supposed to. Then we know that he's in a 3-year study to stand before the king and be inquired upon to see if he'll be a wise man or not for the king to take wisdom from as needed. During this 3-year stand, Daniel does not give us the date of the second year of Nebuchadnezzar as being the third year, the first year, whatever. He gives us to look at this in his view. This is his second year of ministry there in that kingdom that God is training them. Does he have all the answers to why God's doing all this? No, he does not. He doesn't know what the future is going to bring. It's definitely not what he thought it was going to be. So here he is. He is presenting to us that he is following God's way. God's way is not totally known to him, but he is doing the best that he can. And how do we know this? That in the second year, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. Second year of Daniel's ministry under Nebuchadnezzar. We're being given this book in the viewpoint of the author. And then he gives us, without boasting, he gives us knowledge of what's taking place. In the second year, he goes and takes his book out of Hebrew, gives us in the Syriac tongue, the Aramaic language, showing the readers that I indeed have, this is Daniel, I have indeed have studied the language, I have put forth my best effort, I have done the best unto God, and everything that is given to me to do. And in this case, I'm following the diet. God has blessed me there. He has blessed me with the studies, because I'm being told about this. I'm not there, but I'm being told about this, of what's taking place with the king, and this problem with this dream and killing off the wise men by his servant, which you'll find later. And he's being told this in the Syriac language, Aramaic. And so he's relaying this in the Aramaic because he's showing you that I'm doing the best that God's given me to do in my ministry. And one of them is to learn this language, learn this culture, because I'm going to be quizzed by the king. This is what God has me doing. I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to show others that you need to do the same thing. Do your best in what God is giving you to do. Regardless if you like it or not, do your best as unto God. So he is showing us, without boasting, showing us that I have learned the language. I'm able to write this in Aramaic right now in my second year for no other reason than to be a witness unto us of God and how to walk with God. So here he is now. He's relating the story and he continues on. These Chaldean wise men have answered again, not harshly like they did earlier when they spoke to the king as though he wasn't really a king. And chapter 2 verse 4, quote, Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation, unquote. So they're being very bold and very arrogant. Now, after he has told them that his dream has gone from him, that you either tell me or I'll kill you, or if you tell me, I'll give you gifts. They're now answering him back, realizing how grave this is. They say, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretations of it. So now we need to look into parsing this verse out to see how are these people answering the king. Is it like, tell me the dream? Or is it like, please tell me the dream? How are they doing this? So let's look at the interlinear translation parsing of this and find out what's going on here, so we can get a better understanding of what's happening and what Daniel is trying to convey to us. So I'm going to look at the Aramaic now and parse this out. Okay, now I have gone and looked at Daniel 2:4 to see what the difference is between the parsing of the Aramaic and how these wise men are talking to the king to see if there's any difference. And I have found a difference. Let me show you this. When the Chaldeans were first talking to the king and they used the Aramaic word for tell, this is what had transpired initially in verse 4. This is a PL stem, and this is where the difference is. This is the form of a basic stem of the verb, which is equivalent to the Hebrew quell. So it's a causative imperative action, which means that it's not a finished action yet. Now, and continuing on in verse 4, we see that when it says tell, thy servants is causative, not done yet, thy servants the dream, and we will show. Here is the difference. And we will show. This one is a PL. And what that means in the Aramaic language is they're expressing an intensive, intentional action of an imperfect aspect, so it's intentional, not completed. So they're saying, and we will show. So they're being very intentional, the interpretation. So let's take a look and see the difference now of this action where they're boasting quite heavily to the king. And let's take a look at the parsing of this verse in verse 7. And let's look at tell again. It's a causative, non-complete action when we go ahead and parse this out. But when we get down to and show, we will show. Okay, so and we will show. Let's parse that out. It's an aphiel, not a PL, an aphiel. And what this is a causative conjunction. So they're not boasting like they were before and being, headstrong to the king. And of course, it's an imperfect aspect, so it's not completed. But they've changed their tone. They're not as intentional, but they're being causative, like, tell us the dream and we will show you the interpretation. They're saying basically the same words, but they're saying it differently. And Daniel is pointing this out to us because apparently what he was told, but there was a definite um, different action and response from the wise men than from the first, which has been related to him by one of the servants of the king who's telling him the story now. And Daniel is learning this and responding to us about what's going on. So he's telling us the difference. Now, when you read John Gill's commentary on this verse and others, you're seeing that they feel like the wise men are boasting because they're basically saying the same thing. What they didn't do is parse out this in the Aramaic and find out what does it mean, what's the difference. So the servant of the king is telling Daniel what has transpired, as we'll see later, and he's telling him that there's this difference. They were headstrong and intensive. They're repeating the same word, but now they're being more mild. They're being more causative in how they're saying it's not as intensive as they were the first time in the boasting. So we're seeing there's a slight difference here. We have to pay attention to this as we're studying it. When we parse this out, this verse 7, we're going to do the same thing. They answered. We'll parse that. And it's a PL perfect, which means that it is equivalent to the quell, so it's causative, and perfect aspect means that they're expressing a completed action. So they answered again and said. Parse out and said. It's a PL participle, which is causative, and the participle represents an action or condition in an unbroken continuity, like to be. So, and said, let the king tell. We'll parse that out. It's a PL imperfect like verse 4 was. And what that means is that it represents the quell as a causative. And the imperfect aspect means it's not finished. So that is identical to verse 4, how they use that. And it's doing the same thing here. His servants the dream, and we will show. Now, again, like I pointed out, this, and we will show. Here's the difference from verse 4 to verse 7. They're doing a causative conjunction. So they're not being so bold and saying, oh, we'll do it. They're saying, tell us and we'll be able to do this. And we will show, so the difference, as we noted, the interpretation of it. So that is the portion of this one. And I've looked at the commentaries, and they're pretty much running the same thing. They're pretty much thinking that the wise men here are boasting. But when you parse it out, you see there's a difference. And this difference was given by the servant of the king to Daniel. And Daniel is making sure that he expresses this. So as you can see, Daniel has not only learned the language of the Chaldeans in this short time frame, he's learned the idioms, he's learned the differences, and he's relaying this. He has studied very well. He has done his best. And this is being shown by how he's handling this verse. So, let's take a look one more time at both verses. We're going to connect them. So, Daniel 2:4 and Daniel 2:7. I'm going to read Daniel 2:4 all the way to 2:7. King James Bible quote, Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, The thing is gone from me. If ye will not make known unto me the dream, and the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if ye show the dream and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. They answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it. Unquote. Now this was very smart with what Daniel did, translating this story into Aramaic and not Hebrew. Had he done it in Hebrew, they could have been challenged that he wrote it down, he interpreted it, and that it was not correct in some of its aspects, nor interpretation or relating, and there'd be fault in the translation. But he, in fact, was learning the language, and he wrote it in Aramaic. And therefore, we have, hopefully, word for word, what was said to him by the servant of the king about this transaction that's going on, and we have insight to it. So Daniel is showing his wisdom and what he is doing here. Now may God richly bless you as you go along your way studying the scriptures.